Chapter 6. The Bond. Market day dawned murky. The sky the colour of tarnished silver. The clouds hung low enough to threaten rain. The square steamed with morning mist and the smell of wet hay and roasting chestnuts. Alaris had taken his place behind a booth of fine silks and ribbons, the sort of wares a noblewoman or a bride-to-be might linger over. The merchant, glad of a morning off, had left him with a nod and no questions. Behind the tent, Sleet waited, saddled and restless. He fussed at the tablecloth, more for somewhere to put his hands than for any need of it, his eyes never still on the crowd. His pulse thudded in his ears. Every borrowed second stretched thin. He had worked the market for days, trading nods and easy words with the other vendors until he was part of the scenery. Only one thing gnawed at him. What if she was with the princess again? What if Elysa knew his face at a glance? But when the familiar carriage rolled in, she was not in it. The relief came so sharp it ached, shot through to his shame, with a thread of disappointment. The princess stepped down, radiant under the heavy sky, her hair beneath a plain veil, her dress modest for a royal bride. He would have known her anywhere. Some part of him had feared he would find a stranger wearing her face, but no, it was Anne Lena. His lady, true and whole. When she reached his booth, he spoke low and not in the common tongue but in the soft cadence of their northern home. "Princess," he kept his eyes on the ribbons, "I've come to free you. We can go now." Her gaze found his and for a moment time itself stumbled. There was recognition in it and, of all things, amusement. She leaned in, answering in the same tongue. "Old friend, I am happy here, soon to wed a man I love. I have no wish to leave," and she made to move on. The words turned in his chest like a blade. It was not her own will speaking. It could not be. She had been taken once, and he had failed to stop it. He would not fail her twice, not while there was breath in him and dark magic on her. Duty rose in him like a tide and drowned the doubt. His hand found the satchel and the ether-soaked cloth folded inside it. Shame flared in him, deep and crimson. But duty, he told himself, and moved on its word anyway. He pressed the damp cloth over her face from behind and caught her as she sagged, lifting her light as a fainting noblewoman, drawing her through the curtains to where Sleet stood waiting. For a few strides of cobblestone, the market noise covered everything. Then the first shout went up. "Stop, the princess!" He was already in the saddle. Anne Lena steadied against him, spurring the mare. Sleet leapt forward, hooves cracking on stone. Behind him, guards bellowed, people scattered, and the alarm bells began to swing. He aimed for the eastern wall, the stretch he had marked days back, too high to climb, but just low enough that a horse with a running start and a fool's luck might take the outer slope. Then the wind came up hard and wrong, and he looked up. A vast emerald shadow swept the rooftops. The dragon. She rose from the direction of the castle, scales catching green fire in the dull light, her wing beats churning the mist into visible whirlwinds, far larger this low than he had let himself imagine, a storm with a will and a body. "So," he muttered, and tightened his grip. "This is it." He leaned flat to Sleet's neck and begged her for more. The wall loomed. The dragon was faster. She came down across his path in a crash of talon and stone, the wind of her landing nearly unseating him, and Sleet screamed and shied. He hauled the mare along the wall toward the gate, already grinding shut on the watchman's shouts, and the dragon struck down again ahead of him, a living barricade flung across the way. Her eyes met his, those huge green-flecked eyes, and in them for a heartbeat was not rage nor triumph, but something he had no time to name, sorrow. Sleet reared. Alaris threw his arm around Anne Lena and turned his body to take the ground for them both. The cobbles slammed the breath from him, stars burst behind his eyes. Hands were on him then, and fists, the princess's weight suddenly gone from his arms. The world went red and then black. The last thing he saw before the dark took him was the dragon folding smaller and smaller into the shape of the woman he had been hunting through the market crowds for days, and the last thing he heard was her voice cracking across the square, ordering the guards off him. His last thought, drifting down into the dark, was almost a peaceful one. that on the first night, in the firelight, the two of them had been telling each other the absolute truth. The bond had caught her bent over Katarin's papers in the magistrate's hall, an hour's tedium of cisterns and grain tariffs, and then torn through her chest like a struck brand. Green, molten, screaming, Alaris, moving, desperate, in danger. She was over the balcony rail before Katarin could draw breath to ask, the change swallowing the fall, wings of green fire catching the mist as the emerald dragon arrowed down toward the lower city, her heart in her throat. She reached him as the mare ran flat out for a stretch of wall no warhorse alive could clear, the princess limp in his arms, the three of them aimed at a certain death. So she made a smaller wreck to forbid a larger one, dropped across his path, forced the horse parallel and screaming toward the closing gate, and when sleet reared and flung her riders to the stones, Elysa was already folding back into human skin. Stop! It began as a roar and ended as a word, and it rang off the walls of the square. The guards, who had a man down and bloodied and were in no mood to be gentle, froze mid-blow, the authority she had drilled into them, session after session moving their hands before their minds caught up. They hauled Alaris off the cobbles, senseless but breathing, and carried him to a holding cell in the mansion. The princess, fully awake now, had Sleet's bridle, gentling her with the mare's own name and a handful of soft, practiced words. The horse's panic ebbed under the familiar touch, her ears flicking to her. She knew this animal plainly, as well as she knew her own hands. Elysa watched the three of them, horse, princess, fallen knight, all knotted together by a history she had no thread in, and felt her chest tighten. They walked back to the mansion on foot behind the guards who carried Alaris, Anne-Lena leading Sleet and fussing over her, running a hand down each leg for heat or limp. "She was my gift to him when he swore his oath," Anne-Lena said as they went. "Born in my stables, I raised her myself." In the quiet of the inner courtyard, while Anne-Lena brushed the mare down, Elysa finally said it plainly, low and even. "Alaris is my mate. What lies between us is old magic, fully binding, and it forgives no half-measures." Anne-Lena nodded, awe and worry at war in her face. "You cannot force a man like that, you know." Elysa wrapped her bare arms around herself, another shirt left in rags by an unplanned shift. "I don't want to. I have no wish to be chained for an eternity to someone who resents me for it. He chooses me, or he lets me go to the void. There is nothing in between." The sadness in it was soft and complete. Anne-Lena looked at her over Sleet's neck, pity and understanding both. "He isn't choosing between you and me, you know." She turned her eyes away. "He's choosing between his duty and you. For a man like him, that is the far harder thing." The jealousy that had lifted its small, ugly head in Elissa's chest sank again, dispelled by the plain truth of it. This woman knew Alaris in ways it would take her decades to learn. The bond pulsed, green and insistent. With Sleet settled in the stable, they went into the library, to Katarin. He was already pacing its length, tension in every stride. The moment Anne-Lena came through the door, he was across the room, hands hovering over her, checking her for hurt with an intensity that gave away the fear beneath it. Only when he was sure she was whole did his shoulders come down at all. Then he turned on Elysa, and the worry went sharp. "Why?" he demanded, somewhere between offended and afraid. "Did you not tell me your latest toy had come to steal my bride?" She met him level. "Because I did not think he would actually try." A pause. "And he is not merely a toy. The prophecy has finally caught up with me. Alaris is my mate. To accept the bond or refuse, it is his to choose. I will not force him." Her voice dropped. "And if he refuses me, I will not be able to live on." The colour left Katarin's face. He loved both women in that room. Elysa, who had his life and his loyalty, and Anne-Lena, his bride, and the thought of losing either was past bearing. Without a word, he crossed to the shelves, pulled down a heavy tome, one of Elissa's own books of dragon lore, and turned the pages until he found it. There is still a way out for you. He set his finger to the text. Kill him, and the bond breaks. You live. Elysa smiled, sad and knowing. Read the cost written beneath that passage. She touched the page. It would be cutting away half of myself. What was left? She shook her head slowly. Wouldn't quite be me anymore. But you would be alive, Katarin pressed. And even if the man could accept you, it would still be dangerous. A human mate. High is a dragon's greatest weakness, she finished quietly. I know. They share everything. One life between two. If he dies, I die. That is why dragons with human mates were the first to fall when the world went dark. She looked between them. And humans are not built for a dragon's years. If he accepts me, he will watch everyone he loves grow old and die while he stays young. The silence held until Anne-Lena broke it. Alaris is a good and honourable man. I would wager my father never told him the truth when he sent him after me. He would walk through fire for me. He does not deserve an execution. Her voice cracked on the last of it. Katarin's mouth set in a hard line. He studied Anne-Lena a long moment. A duel, then. Tomorrow at noon, before the wedding. She fights the knight. He glanced at Elysa. And if Alaris wins, the princess is his to carry home. If he loses, he is yours. Or dead, as you choose. It is practical. And it gives him exactly the choice your prophecy demands, to take you or refuse you with a sword in his hand. Elysa held his gaze, weighing costs that were every one of them unbearable. At last, she nodded. I accept. I see no other road. A thread of dark humour came into her voice. And if it ends in my death, let it at least be a good show. Promise me, Katarin said, that you will truly consider killing him instead. The words hung there. Anne-Lena's face tightened, but she held her tongue. Elysa saw it. I promise to consider it, she said carefully. It was all she could honestly promise. We tell him the terms the moment he wakes, Katarin decided. I will do it myself. And I will see him after, said Anne-Lena, her first words since the duel was named, to explain other things. Alaris would have his choice. Chapter 7. Matters of the Heart. When Alaris opened his eyes, the light in the cell was low and orange, evening then. The day must have bled into dusk while he lay senseless. The stones smelled of damp and old smoke. His cheek and temple throbbed, but the bleeding had stopped, and bandages and ointment had been laid on by careful, if rough, hands. A guard sat by the bars, polishing his own breastplate with the slow, absent care of a man who had done it 1,000 times. Beside him, incongruous, lay Alaris's own armour, left behind at the tavern to spare Sleet the weight of it for the jump, and somehow here now, being shined. At the sight of him awake, the guard rose and gave a small, awkward bow. They tended your hurts. You'll be presentable, my lord, was all he said. Presentable for what? Alaris rasped, sitting up. The world was slow to follow the movement. The gleam of the polished armour in the man's hands felt obscene, a promise of some formal execution. Then a different worry shouldered to the front of his mind. What happened to my horse? He asked, before the man could answer the first question. The guard's face softened. He cleared his throat. The horse is safe and better off than you, munching oats in the magistrate's stable. He set the metal down and met Alaris's eyes. You'll be well enough. Not safe, mind. But a man like you doesn't live expecting safety. Relief and dread crashed together in him. Sleet. She's with the princess? His voice came too small, as though the welfare of an old warhorse were the last thing that mattered. And in a way it was. His own life seemed already a settled account, the rest a formality. She is, the guard said kindly, and went back to his work. Before Alaris could say more, footsteps came, measured, unhurried, carrying the soft authority of a man used to being obeyed without raising his voice. Katarin stepped into the low cellar in his magistrate's cloak, his smile small and dry. My bride is begging me to show you mercy, he said, crossing the floor to lean against the far wall. carefully beyond Alaris's reach. She thinks her father lied to you, convinced you she'd been stolen and bewitched. Alaris stared, and she wasn't. The words came hot and sharp. Katarin's smile turned rueful. No, she is here because she asked to be, and nothing more than ordinary human affection binds her to me. Then, with amusement, you appear to be every bit as gifted at bewitching a lady's heart. Alaris's brow furrowed. I only know whether, Katarin went on, half jest, half confession. Hearts were never my field. When I found my own in another's hands, all my reason failed me. I did not expect it to take her the same way. The knight's confusion must have shown plain on his face because Katarin laughed, genuinely delighted. You truly have no idea. Alaris reached for the sense of it and came up with nothing. It seems, Katarin said slowly, that you have bewitched my dragon. Alaris looked at the sorcerer, his mouth slack, confusion still the only thing on his face. For heaven's sake, the amusement curled warmer. Anne-Lena wasn't exaggerating when she called you hopeless in matters of the heart. Must I spell it for you? My dragon has fallen for you. Understanding dawned slowly over his honest face. The lady's silence, her absence all that long week, it had not been indifference. It had been restraint. Though I suspect, Katarin added lightly, she now believes you want the princess more than you want her. The horror that took Alaris's face at that was very nearly comical. Then the amusement slid from Katarin like a shed garment. Tomorrow, before the wedding, we will have this settled, publicly. You will fight your dragon. Alaris's mouth went dry. Fight her? Katarin's eyes were steady and sharp. Kill her in the duel, and the princess is yours to take home. His voice cooled, not cruel, only practical. Fail, and you are hers, or dead, as she pleases. And so you don't go to it thinking yourself deceived. Anne-Lena will come to you herself soon. With that he left, the door closing on a soft click that landed too loud in Alaris's still aching skull. The silence after him stretched thin and taut. It broke to a lighter step than the magistrate's, the quick, familiar tread that had once raced him through the reeds at his stepfather's estate. The door was unlocked for her, and Anne-Lena came in as if walking into their old playhouse in the woods and not a guarded cell where he was the prisoner, and she, it seemed, the captor's willing bride. She sat on the cold bench across from him, her look caught somewhere between a scolding and pity, the easy intimacy of childhood in the tilt of her head. We have talked about this before. You do not need to save me, she chided gently, as though reminding him of a rule he'd let slip. Alaris laughed, hollow. Do you truly want to marry him? The question came edged by a week of watching and scheming, and by the grisly terms now hanging over him. I do. No hesitation, bright as the voice that had once called him to games by the river. The sheer force of her certainty quieted the last of his doubt. She crossed to sit beside him and told him then, calm as someone remarking on the weather, how it had begun. A sovereign son who had stood at court with honest eyes and a barely leashed power held carefully behind them. A lonely royal girl too young for the weight of a crown, who had found in him a soul caught in the same mire. A bond struck in person over a few days when they were 11, and carried for years after in letters, broken now and then, by a stolen meeting. She told him of her father's iron designs, of alliances forged out of marriages, of herself as one piece on a board. I am not a prize, Alaris, nor a token in my father's game. I left it all behind gladly. I have chosen this. Katarin is clever and kind, and we have loved each other a long time. He is my choice. They sat like children on the riverbank again, side by side while she gave him the small things, a strange southern rhyme he'd taught her, a market walked in secret, a laugh that had undone them both, the words that had made an ordinary afternoon feel like a covenant, the long letters, and, at the last, the plea for rescue, and why she had kept him out of her plans. That final truth ached in him. She had not trusted him to let her steer her own life, not while he was so bound to his duty as she stepped away from hers. When she had finished, told the way she'd once told him of the winters they spent apart, her tone shifted to something more grown and playful with it. "Now," she said, "explain to me what is going on with you and Lys." She used the pet name so easily it was almost a cruelty. A painful band drew tight around his heart, and he found himself longing for that same familiarity with her, knowing he would most likely never live to claim it. They were worlds apart, and about to be flung together one last final time. Elysa scrubbed a hand over his face and made what confession he could without saying too much. A warm room, wine, a woman who had delighted in mockery, and, once in truth. "We had one good night," he said at last. "I didn't think it meant anything to her. I never imagined." He stopped. The rest would have sounded even to himself like treason. He sighed. "But it seems it did mean something, to both of us. And now I'm told to fight her, to kill her, if I'm to keep my honour and the promise I made my king." The absurdity of it forced a bitter laugh out of him. Anne-Lena's face went solemn. She reached over and took his hand, the gesture small but sure. "If you carry me back to my father, I will run again and torch the castle on my way out for good measure." The child's mischief and the woman's will braided together in it. Then, serious. "And I will not forgive you. He promised you my hand, I've no doubt. It will never happen. You would have to keep me in chains in a deep, storm-proof cellar to keep me at all." She faltered at the disgusted horror on his face and laughed. "But you know that already." He hurried to tell her his love for her had never been anything but a brother's, and that the moment his oath to bring her home was discharged, she would be free to do as she willed, that he would help her get away himself if she asked it. Anne-Lena nodded. This much they had always understood between them. Then she went on, quieter. "Elysa, understand me. Lys is not merely in love with you. You are her true mate, for a dragon that is no small thing. It is a great and complicated one, and not only for her, for you both. Becoming a dragon's mate has a price. Being mortal, you don't feel the bond fully now, and you would not feel it as she does even if you refused her. You could do it, and live well enough, if not unscathed. It is not so for her. Her life is in your hands. Killing you might let her take it back. But she would sooner tear out her own heart than bring herself to harm you." The words, cruelly honest, oddly tender, pressed a truth into him, heavier than Katarin's challenge. He had come here a rescuer, plain and grey with simple vows of service. Now he stood where friendship and honour and love all twisted into a single thorn. "What is the price," he whispered, "of becoming her mate?" He had to know it to choose well and not blind. She looked at him with a strange compassion, secretly glad he had asked at all. "You would be bound to her for all of time. Everything she has you would share, her feelings, her fate, and in the end her very life, for however long or short fate allows. You would stand as you are today on the day my pyre burns. And, Elysa, your life would no longer be yours alone to spend as you please. You have never cared a copper for yourself. You would have to learn to keep yourself safe for her sake. You would be her greatest weakness." She rose and came closer, the way she had when they were small, and he'd skinned a knee and ruffled his hair in the old, infuriating way. "That head of yours has always gotten you into trouble," she said, the reproof folded into affection. "This time I order you to follow your heart instead." She left him then. A soft shuffle in the corridor, the clang of the lock. The cell filled with a silence thick with the whispers of their childhood, and unbidden came the memory of the only other time she had ever given him an order. Elysa pressed his forehead to the cool stone and felt the weight of it all bear down at once. The king's promise, the honour to be bought with his death, the quiet insistence that had woken when a woman in green leaned close, and the even quieter stranger tug that had lived beneath his ribs ever since. Katarin's terms burned in his mind, But it was the other voice, the one Anne-Lena had left hanging in the air, that tormented him worse. He thought of his oath, the one he had sworn at his knighting 8 years gone, the wording that had startled the whole court and earned him a proper thrashing from his otherwise mild-mannered master, and bound him still. A man who had lived by orders given, and not by choices freely made, now had to choose, for himself, and found it harder than any battle. Outside, distant as a half-remembered dream, the city breathed on in anticipation of its bloody spectacle and its wedding, every soul in it expecting the dragon to flatten the night without effort. They even spared some sympathy for the poor hapless puppet of the Northern King, those especially who had laboured beside him through the week. Inside his chest, the small whisper, whatever its right name, was no longer only a mystery. He turned it over and looked at it squarely. It had become the offer of a whole new life, one he could either accept entirely, surrendering all his honour and his duty and his pride, or refuse utterly, by spilling her blood. For a moment he let himself imagine she would make the choice for him, snap him up clean while she still stood vast and terrible, and the picture brought a flush of relief. Then it faded. He knew better. He would already be dead and buried, had she not left the choosing to him. The war was still raging behind his eyes when the dark came down. The brew the guard brought with his dinner carried herbs for a dreamless sleep. He made no secret of it. "A man rests better for it, even on his last day, my lord," he said politely. Alaris drank it gratefully and let his eyes fall closed, hoping the answer might find him while he slept. He woke to the clang of the door. Night had come down full. The cell was dark, but for moonlight pouring through the little window, and in it stood a shape he knew. A nightgown, a shawl drawn round the shoulders. His mind sat oddly behind a thin fog, but he had no trouble at all knowing her. Elysa. He pushed himself up to sit as she crossed to him and stopped close in front of him. "Am I dreaming?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. The guard had warned her he would not be holy himself, and would not remember the visit come morning. She was glad of it. She had come only to say her farewell, and it was better, she had decided, that he keep no memory of it. Better it not weigh on the choice that had to be his and his alone. His hands rose and closed around hers with a tenderness that broke something in her. There was no hurry in him, none of the tavern's bright hunger, only this slow, fogged gentleness, as if he had all the time in the world and meant to spend every grain of it on her. He drew her down into his lap and she went, helpless to do otherwise. "If this is my dream," he murmured against her hair, "then inside it I am free of my duty." And he kissed her, soft and unbearably sweet. She kissed him back. She could not have stopped herself. It seemed there was nothing she could refuse this man. The shawl slipped from her shoulders unnoticed. His hands moved over her with reverence rather than heat, learning her, not claiming her, and where their first night had been all her teaching and her fire, this was his to lead. And he led it gently, like a man handling something he knew he was about to lose. What passed between them then was slow and gentle and grief-soaked, with none of the tavern's wine-bright madness. The drug had stripped away his fear and his guard, and left only this aching tenderness, and a sorrow he was too far under to hide. He breathed his plea against the curve of her neck. "Kill me tomorrow. Live free. Remember me." His voice cracked on it. "I don't trust myself to stand against my duty, so take the choice from me and live." The rest broke apart, and what words could not carry he held instead, his arms tight around her as though he might keep her by will alone. Something in Elysa came undone that she had not known could. Joy and sorrow ran in her at once, impossibly braided, the rightness of him, the bond drawn taut and humming between them, and beneath it the unbearable knowledge of what he was asking. Tears slid hot into her hair, and she held him closer to keep this one impossible moment a heartbeat longer. And there, gathered close and begged to end him, she turned over the thing Katarin had asked her to weigh. She made herself look at it honestly. A clean strike tomorrow. His blood, her freedom, a life going on without him in it. She knew, with a certainty that went down to the floor of her, that she could never do it, not to save herself, not for anything. The oracle had told it true after all. The choice was her mate's to make and never hers, and his refusal, if it came, would be the end of her. She let the last of her bargaining go and made a quiet, terrible peace with it, that she had no chance at all against the iron of his honour, and that she would rather meet whatever came than buy her years with his life. When at last he slipped back under, spent and unguarded, and she could ease herself free, she gathered the shawl and stood a moment looking down at him. Love and grief moved together in her eyes. She bent and touched her mouth once to his brow and breathed her farewell into the dark. "Live well for me, my love."